Good morning, everyone, and thanks for having us here. I want to flip to the other side from the highest technology and the connectivity that is digital and spend some time with my panelists here looking at the softer side of engagement. And this session is being filmed as part of BBK's series Pharma Live 15. After our session, our panelists will be around and you can have more in-depth discussions with them if you would like. So let's kick off with Season 2, Episode 1. And I'd like to welcome Dr. Gerald Dryden. We'll call him Tad for this meeting. He's a physician and has a number of other credentials, but is a researcher at the University of Louisville. And Dr. Linda Glazer, who is started as a scientist and then became a physician practicing, and about maybe five or 6 years ago, shifted her focus and left her practice and became a trialist. So she's going to join us and represent that perspective. And then this is Annie Finstein, and she is a past clinical trial participant in Crohn's disease, and she is an ongoing searcher for clinical research studies. So Annie, thank you for being here as well. So I want to start, maybe Tad, you can kick us off with, what is the highest point, what's your strongest moment of patient engagement in the clinical studies you're working with?
So we've been talking a lot about patient engagement. It's something that I think is the buzzword, perhaps, at this point in time. And as I think about what patient engagement means to me, it means when we have that patient in our office, we are interacting with that patient, we are explaining the trial, we're explaining how they're going to participate and how we're going to be the caregiver for them during that engagement or during that participation in the research. That's really where the rubber hits the pavement. That's where they're going to either decide to continue with the trial and allow us to be their physician for a period of time or back away. And so I think that all of that activity that occurs beforehand is going to kind of coalesce at that moment in that first visit in the clinic. So to me, that's the area where, or at the point in time where I think we have to be on our game for patient engagement in the most meaningful way.
So thank you. Linda, today, what is your highest form?
Well, I think I agree with Tad, but I also think that it starts actually prior to that first visit, and that's the initial contact. For me, I run a research site, so I don't have a patient population to draw from except a database. Many of my patients are naive to me and naive to clinical trials, and we get them through a variety of recruitment efforts. So they don't know me. The first interaction, which is maybe a telephone call or an email, has to engage the patient to ask for further information. So when we make that initial engagement, we're not saying we want you to be a study participant. We're saying we want to know about you. You need to know about me, and you need to know about the clinical trial. So let's have a chat or let's have an email exchange, just gathering information back and forth. And that, I think, is actually the very first part of the patient engagement process.
So as we look at how the technologies and upcoming generations of potential study participants and their world and their acceptance and reliance on digital, how prepared are you at the site level for integrating the connectivity that Dr. Fambu was just talking about?
Yeah, so I will say that with our experience with, say, patient finder activities and things like that, which many of these would potentially be mechanisms for drawing patients out of the population and into your patient practice, again, it takes that personal touch to be able to get that patient to engage in the research, to be able to sign on to the research plan. So you can do all the electronics that you want, But again, the kind of rubber hits the road in the clinician's office, because that direct patient engagement or development of a relationship is really what kind of cements the relationship there.
So you think that the relationship is the foundation for people being more open to using the passive sensors or other digital tools?
Absolutely.
Okay. So Annie, let me come to you and ask, you know, in this category of the connectivity at the personal level between a physician and a potential study participant, what is it that you want to know or understand about a clinical researcher that you're evaluating? And I know your first experience was when you were much younger, but maybe you can talk about that.
Yeah, I mean, I think being a patient of Crohn's disease for 20 years, I've definitely learned a lot and matured a lot. But if there's anything that I've learned is that you've got to look out for number one, yourself, and if you don't ask those questions, they're not going to get answered. So being a patient for 20 years, I like to, even before probably the past 10 years or so, ask a doctor or tell a doctor my story and really just understand the reaction. And kind of see what their response is. You know, I know a lot with this condition, and so I want to be told something that I don't already know. So I think something that will trigger my excitement and just teach me something or give me some hope that there's something different out there. That's one of the biggest things that I'm looking for.
You mentioned to me at some other conversations we've had over the years that it's almost like an interview. Can you expound on that a little?
So I definitely go into meeting a new study doctor like I would going into a job interview. You're interviewing your employer just as much as they're interviewing you. So when you first step into a new office, you know, you want to kind of see if you like the office environment. It's one of the first things. The people that are greeting you, know, how is that initial experience? And then going into meeting with an employer or a doctor, do you connect on a personal level? Do you have that type of relationship that you think you would succeed in that type of environment? And then you're negotiating salary and more logistics and stuff like that. How is your commute? So there's so many factors going into it. But yeah, it's very similar to a job interview, I think.
Great. Linda, did you want to add? I know we've talked a little bit with Annie, and that started to change.
Right.
This very conversation started to change some of the things you're doing.
After I learned about Annie's, the way she views us, I wasn't always necessarily thinking about how the patient views the physician or views the clinical research environment. And I was telling you that I had changed. And so that now when I do my initial screenings, or we give a lot more information about our site, about our qualifications, and about exactly what this research study will entail for the research participant, just so it makes it so much easier than when they come in for their screening visit. A lot of the questions have been answered, and so there's actually, the patient is more at ease. The personal relationship is key, and that's what is the hallmark of the patient engagement.
Okay. So from your perspective, each of you, what are the biggest struggle points or obstacles for study participants? What's hardest on them to be part of the study?
Well, I think certainly one of the things is from the protocol writers, the burden of the study participant, certainly for so many studies in terms of the amount of procedures that they may endure, if they're coming to a de novo site, the fact that they may have a number of procedures from a number of strange physicians. Certainly, since I'm from the Los Angeles area, transportation is an issue, and certainly, if patients are coming from far away, having early morning visits where the patients may be fasting, them having to come at a certain time may have them leaving their home at 5 or 5:30 in the morning. For that really takes a lot of commitment. So I think that it's more just from a global standpoint, taking care of the patient, not just the site taking care of the patient, which is paramount, but everybody else who's involved in the clinical trial taking care of that study participant.
Ted, what about you?
So my patients might drive 3 or 4 hours, but they're traveling a couple hundred miles to come see me versus across town as they are for you in LA. But
It takes the same amount of time
exactly,
to go.
exactly. So for me, a lot of our studies require colonoscopy. So just think about being fasting and having taken a prep and having to be at your doctor's office by, say, 6 o'clock in the morning for a colonoscopy. That really complicates matters. And I think that when you're looking at these pieces of paper, and I've written out protocols and I've made trial, study, putting down all the sessions, and when you look at that on a piece of paper, you don't realize that there's a person on the end of that actually has to be fulfilling each one of those criteria. And as a clinician, we see this every day, and we see how those patients engage, and we do feel for them for the struggle. And if they are taking a colonoscopy 3 times during a 1-year clinical study, I just did my screening colonoscopy about a week and a half ago, and taking that prep is miserable. So anything that you can do to decrease the burden on the patient, and you also have to realize that you're taking them out of a healthcare system to a certain extent in many of these studies, and putting them into a clinician or a clinical trialist practice for a period of time, and so they may lose that engagement with their original physician.
So some research that BBK has done says at this point now 77% of sponsors are connecting with patients and engaging them in the protocol design. But in the field, you're still experiencing real challenges between the study design, the visit schedules, the tests, et cetera, and other assessments, and how you're experiencing it and how the patients are experiencing it. Annie, what about from your perspective as a study participant? Do you remember back to the first study that you did and how that felt?
Yeah, I mean, being in a pediatric trial, I relied heavily on my caregiver, who was my mother. And like you guys were saying, it's very early mornings, 5:30, 6 a.m. appointments. And being from the Boston area, we would commute 30 minutes, 45 minutes into the city to the hospitals that were in the office. But such early mornings, and the prep never gets easier as many times as you do it throughout the years, and I've probably had more colonoscopies than most of the people in the room here.
Together,
yeah. But being my caregiver, my mother, being a single parent, the time that she took out of her day to bring me to those appointments, those were hours that she wasn't working and hours that she wasn't getting paid. And it didn't matter, she would have done anything for me, but the logistics, not only just the travel and the physical commute, but also the financial logistics that you need to work out in those situations. And I think, this being 15, 18 years ago that I was in these pediatric trials specifically, I think there's been so much innovation and progression with patient engagement and making it easier, and travel and reimbursement programs that I wish I had then. But I know there's still a lot of work that needs to be done.
Mm-hmm. So as a kid, did you feel guilty or did you feel bad about how participating in the trial created additional pressure?
I definitely felt a little bit of that stress on me because it was stressful for her. So that kind of, made me feel a little bit more stressed, which anybody who knows anything about Crohn's disease doesn't help the situation. But yeah, I absolutely did.
So let's go to sort of another direction and say, how does the participation in clinical research for a study volunteer, how does that change or impact their engagement with the healthcare system in general? Linda?
Well, I think for some of our study participants, it's actually an opportunity to engage in the healthcare system. So that in our area, for the trials that we do, a lot of the participants, this is their only engagement in the healthcare system. They might be choosing to participate in a study in order to receive medication in general. and to receive health care, a physical examination, blood work, whatever it may be. So in that case, it may be initial. For patients who already have health care providers, the clinical research part of it is so very different because they get much more engagement with the people who are doing the clinical trial than they would with their healthcare provider, who may be able to give them 10 or 15 minutes, address one or two of their problems, and off they go. So I think it actually empowers them to go back to their healthcare provider and say, you know what, I need more. I got a lot of care and a lot of attention in my clinical trial, and now I expect you to give me the same degree of care and attention, listen to me, as I did in my general health care situation.
Yeah, I think that's been a sort of a truism in our field for decades now, that the quality of attention, the amount of time that you're spending with healthcare professionals in clinical research is greater than what you're getting in general. But what do you think, Annie? I mean, you're the patient.
I mean, I think it definitely gives you, a patient in a clinical study gives you a different perspective on the healthcare system, and makes you a little bit more well-rounded in terms of what is available to you, and asking questions and maybe demanding something that you weren't receiving before. But it also complicates the situation a little bit more, because in one situation, or like you have a study doctor, but then you have your regular doctor. And sometimes when you go see your regular doctor, you're not even seeing your doctor, you're seeing the NP. So it kind of just comes full circle. Well, who is my doctor? I'm talking to all these different people. I think, like, where's the connectiveness of it? I'm telling 3 people the same thing. You know, make it a little bit easier, and let's kind of bring the communication together to make sure that the messages are being relayed. And I understand doctors are very busy people, and the NPs are amazing, but it just kind of gets repetitive.
So do you think the technologies that are part of your every minute life, how will they, do they help, or does it?
Yeah, the patient portals, I will say, I really enjoy. And I often get very quick responses. I get my test results immediately. So I can message somebody, whether it be the NP or the doctor, or even a study doctor, and get a fairly quick response. But you're still only talking to that one person. So I think the connectiveness between those 3 parties still needs to come together.
Okay. Ted, you want to add anything to that?
I would just say that clinical trials can be intrusive in a patient's life, filling out diaries, getting on your telephone, that kind of thing. So I'm very intrigued about the possibility of some of these enabling technologies, like we heard about last time, say Alexa, asking you your study diary questions at whatever desired time, and repeating those questions if you don't answer them appropriately, at 6 o'clock in the morning, asking you at 6 p.m. And it might avoid some of these problems that we have with missing data and some of the intrusion that these study-related protocols have on patients' lives. So I think that has great promise, and perhaps helps with engagement. Also disseminating information with some of these electronic methods from the clinical trial back to the patient's doctor that could be set up in advance, and then you could avoid some of these HIPAA problems that we've heard a little bit about already today.
Are you ready to integrate them?
I think it would be great, actually. I think that our referring physicians definitely need to have additional information, and if we have mechanisms to be able to make that effortless on our part, then everybody's well served.
Okay, well, thank you all very much. I do like at the end of these sessions to do a quick speed question.
Okay.
So if I can indulge you for a minute. So it's just I'm going to give you 2 choices, and you pick the one that you think is the strongest for you.
Okay.
What do you think is most important at the beginning of a clinical study? Is it information or the relationship?
I think it's relationship.
Linda?
Relationship.
Annie?
Relationship.
Okay. You know about e-consent. Are you a yes or a no on e-consent? Linda?
Yes.
You're a yes.
I'm a yes.
You're a yes.
Yes.
Okay, everybody's on it. Excellent. What's tougher for caregivers, to be a caregiver of a pediatric patient or the caregiver of someone older with a cognitive impairment?
I think it may actually be the caregiver of the older patient. The caregiver of the older patient may not be a 24-hour caregiver. Caregiver of a pediatric patient is a 24-hour caregiver. And there's also, I'm not saying for infants and toddlers, but there is some degree of communication. If you have a 10-year-old, you can communicate as to what's going to happen. If you have an Alzheimer's patient or someone with a cognitive deficit, they may be totally out of it. The problem with that...
Okay, we got to...
Oh, sorry.
Yeah. This was pick one, kind of.
Okay.
That wasn't my speed thing. All right, last one. Universal Studios or Disney World?
Universal.
Universal.
Disney World.
Disney.
Disney. Okay. So our age has also made a difference in
Right.
not just clinical trials, but in how we pick some of our entertainment and certainly our technologies. So thank you, Tad, Linda, Annie. We'll be continuing the conversation later in the Gulf Room. So if you're interested in doing that or interviewing them and adding yourselves to the Farm of 15 live series, love to have you. Thanks again, everybody.